Here we go. Hello, my name is Jordan Kurtz. This is my YouTube channel where I discuss all things related to subconscious limiting maladaptive beliefs. And this is actually my second live stream, so thanks for tuning in if you're watching this. Today I'm discussing a psychiatrist, Gabor Mate. He's on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he's talking about anxiety and ADHD and some of the root causes that he believes are all related to childhood. So I believe it relates very closely to the concepts that I talk about on this channel about subconscious trauma and subconscious beliefs that are formed in childhood. And I think his discussion with Joe Rogan is really great. So let's get into it. I'm going to do a quick sound check just before I start. Oh, I need to unmute the desktop audio. That'll help.
And then you have everyone clapping, and you have the child with a big smile on their face, and you've medicated your child to be a successful and integrated person in society.
Shall I spot out about ADHD for a minute?
Yes. And then you have everyone clapping, and you have the child with a big smile on their face,
Okay,
and you've
that's better.
medicated your child to
Cool. Do that, and I'm going to restart from the beginning. All right, Gabor Mate on Joe Rogan. Let's go.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
I was just watching this very disturbing commercial
Yeah.
yesterday with children, and it was talking about ADHD, and it showed a kid that was not paying attention in class, and it showed these kids like playing around and doing things they weren't supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And then they introduced this medication. And then you have the child raising their hand, and then you have everyone clapping, and you have the child with a big smile on their face, and you've medicated your child to be a successful and integrated person in society.
Shall I spot out about ADHD for a minute?
Yes, please.
That was my first book on ADHD. It's the American Scattered Minds, depending on which edition you get. And that was after I was diagnosed with it myself in my 50s.
What does it mean?
ADHD?
Yeah, what is it exactly? Is it real?
Oh, it's real.
But what does it mean?
Well,
Like if someone has ADHD, it's not like you have herpes, right? Like you can say, "Oh, you got a disease."
well,
What is it?
well, that's the whole point, is that the medical profession and a lot of the so-called experts think about it as a disease, another one of these inherited diseases. In fact, they say it's the most heritable mental illness there is. And I say it's neither an illness nor is it heritable. So the hallmark are...
So I'll start there. So ADHD is neither an illness nor is it heritable. And so he's going against the grain from all these other clinicians. And what he's about to say and explain is that he thinks it has a lot to do with how you were raised in your childhood. So keep going.
are difficulty paying attention when you're not motivated.
Yeah.
So kind of tuning out, like that kid in the commercial.
Like me.
Okay. Poor impulse control, so that you tend to act out whatever emotion arises. And sometimes the hyperactivity, difficulty sitting still and then to fidget and all that. And that described me to a T.
So I'm going to keep track of these. So poor impulse control and hyperactivity. So those two things he's going to so what are the causes? Why would you have poor impulse control and hyperactivity? And he's going to go into that. But I want to note that those two things because that's really important.
And But as soon as I learned about the diagnosis, I knew something. This is not a disease, and it's not heritable, despite the fact that some of my kids were diagnosed with it. What is it? So tuning out is not a disease. So let me ask you a question, if I may.
Okay.
If I were to stress you right now, create stress, emotional difficulty, or tension for you right now, what would be your options of dealing with that, of dealing with me? What would be your options?
I could either get upset or I could leave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could fight back, flight or fight, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But what if you didn't have those options?
Yeah. Then you're stuck.
And now what does the brain do when you're stuck like that?
It gets distracted.
It gets tunes out.
Yeah, it tunes out. You want to do other things, think about other things.
In other words, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah. It's
No.
normal. I mean, the idea that you're...
A coping mechanism. So, from last week, I was flirting with the phrase subconscious speak. I don't know if I'm going to use that term or keep that term. But he's describing these kids are tuning out as a coping mechanism when there's too much stressors around them. So what are coping mechanisms? Well, coping mechanisms are subconscious speak for subconscious programs that encourage us to tune out. I'm going to go full screen for this. So, if I'm a kid and I'm being raised in a particularly stressful environment, and rather than engage, or let's say my parents are fighting frequently, or any other different kind of stressors in the household. Maybe somebody has this, an illness or something like that. Some scenario that is particularly stressful. A child may learn that rather than paying attention to all of those illnesses or the stressors of the house, they adapt the coping mechanism to tune out. And really what that means is their subconscious mind is learning how to interact with the world, and it's saying, okay, rather than engaging in these stresses, which might cause us harm, let's tune them out because we need to be able to focus on ourselves or focus on our own needs. So you extrapolate that forward. Now the kid is now in class, and the classroom is particularly boring. Maybe he's on a subject that isn't particularly interesting, or perhaps all of the subjects aren't particularly interesting. And he's being asked, or the kid, he or she is being asked to sit there and, focus and, focus and study. Maybe you're taking notes, or I don't know what kids do these days. They use tablets maybe. But they're being asked to, sit and concentrate on something. But the kid has but the classroom is a stressful environment. Perhaps the subject is not particularly interesting, or perhaps they don't like the teacher, perhaps any number of things can make the classroom particularly stressful. And so this kid who learned this coping mechanism at home, i.e. their subconscious mind created this program at home, is now being extrapolated further into the classroom. And that's how the child essentially learned to deal with any kind of stressful scenario. And stress can also include, too much stimuli. And so that's what Gabor Mate is describing as ADHD. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with the kid's brain. It's not inherited. It's not heritable. It's that this is something that was learned in childhood, i.e. the subconscious mind was programmed a certain way in childhood, and it manifests itself as ADHD. And so what Gabor Mate is arguing is that ADHD is not really an illness, it's just it's the manifestation, it's the symptoms of a larger issue. And this larger issue is that this child developed these subconscious programs to protect themselves. And so the clinician is looking at these outward symptoms, but they're not really addressing why they have them. Or they're essentially assuming that it's genetic or it's inherited, which is, I guess, the same thing. So if you have a kid that is, but he's essentially arguing that it's not genetic. It's all environmental. And he'll go into a couple examples, I'll play it in a sec here, about how there are different examples of how people, basically it's how your parents react to you in stressful environments makes all the difference in whether or not you end up manifesting the ADHD symptoms or not. So let's keep going.
Child who is an 8-9-year-old ball of energy filled with hormones and life and thoughts and things they enjoy, and then you make them sit down all day in this unnatural state in a classroom with fluorescent lights and stare at a teacher that's unmotivated and underpaid and is teaching something in a very boring and non-entertaining way. And that if this kid doesn't lock in like a zombie, we need to medicate them.
Yeah, well, the other part of it is that if you look at my infancy, and it sounds like yours, we spent our first year or two under very difficult circumstances, a lot of stress.
So he's going to do this multiple times, but notice how Gabor Mate will continuously throughout this video keep referencing back to infancy, childhood, young child, children, but he's describing the environment that the child was in. So just notice how he's going to keep going back to that.
Infants can't help but absorb the stress of their parents.
Right.
They can't help it. What does an infant do? Could I have escaped or fought back? Could you have? All we could do is tune out.
Yes.
But when is this tuning?
Okay. I'm going to repeat that. Infants can't escape the stressors of the parents. They can't fight back. So what do they do instead? They tune out. He said that pretty quickly, and I wanted to highlight that. But in that process of tuning out, that is the subconscious learning a new program, learning a new survival mechanism. So he doesn't say the words subconscious program, but that's what he's describing. He's describing that process of there's a stressor in the environment, in this case, the parents, or the parents creating stressors, and the child is helpless, it can't fight back, but it does need the parents to survive. So instead it develops coping mechanisms, and in this case the coping mechanism is tuning out. And it learns that tuning out is the way to survive, and way to survive in this environment. And this is just one example. Perhaps the infant learned, instead of tuning out, that it had to not show its emotions very much. There have been examples of babies that are born who don't cry a lot, and they've tied that to mothers who were in a particularly stressful times. And so the baby learns, even as a baby, that if it needs to get attention, it needs to not cry, because crying creates more stresses on the mother. The mother's freaking out when the child is crying. And so the baby learns to suppress its emotions more. So the type of reaction or the type of program that's developed from these stressors can be different in different situations. Sometimes it's manifests in the symptoms of ADHD and tuning out. Sometimes it can be repressing emotions. Sometimes I've seen, in particular examples, they have specific fears and phobias if the stressors are really specific. One example, that the mother was washing the child, I've heard, in a bath, and crying because she was nervous, and the baby developed kind of a phobia or fear of water, or particularly the water being dumped on their head. And that's a subconscious program. And so it's not always the same what the subconscious program ends up being, but it's very likely that anytime this child is in a particularly stressful environment, it will learn something. We have to learn something in order to survive. Our ancestors who learned nothing in stressful situations probably got eaten. If you never learn that the lion who's chasing you is probably going to eat you, and you're not stressed about that, you are probably the one who's going to get eaten. So these subconscious programs are not bad. They're designed to keep us alive and to thrive and, reproduce and, selfish gene. So these programs, there's a tendency of thinking that these programs, these beliefs are bad or just, I guess, I don't like labeling the program as bad. I think maladaptive is a more specific, is a more accurate way of describing it. All right, let's keep going.
Not happening when our brain is being developed.
Right.
And our brain, this is the part that nobody taught me in medical school, but it turns out that brain science now teaches us that the human brain develops under the impact of the environment. So
the human brain develops under the impact of the environment. Stressor, response, learned behavior. Now, learned behavior is that subconscious program, probably developing in childhood. So this is all really good information.
But the most salient feature of the environment that shapes the circuits of the human brain is actually the relationship with the parents. And if the parents are present and emotionally attuned and available, the child brains develop properly. But the parents are stressed, the child absorbs the stress. What can they do with it? They tune out. And that tuning out thing is programmed into the brain. And then 10 years later or 50 years later, we say, you got this disease. No, you don't. You've got a coping mechanism that's no longer working for you. But it had a function when it first came along. So this whole idea.
Exactly. So he just described kind of what I just laid out. So the stress is, I think he uses the word transferred to the young child. Really, what it is if the infant sees parents in stressful situations, the infants are constantly learning and reacting to their environment. So, like you said, if the parents are calm, peaceful, they can handle the stressors of life well in healthy ways, and the infant learns that too. But if the parent, the parents are essentially gods to young children. And if the parents just seem stressed, that means that, well, the gods of that child's life are stressed. So the child better be stressed. Because if the parents are stressed, these beings which are keeping me alive, if they're stressed, I better be stressed. But I'm an infant. I don't really have a way of handling that stress yet. And so the way I handle that stress is I tune out. In this case. I mean, there can be different cases for different children, but we're talking about ADHD and how those symptoms manifest. And so, like he said, he's like, you become 50 years old, you get an ADHD diagnosis. He's like, well, no, it's not ADHD. It's actually different cases for different children, but we're talking about ADHD and how those symptoms manifest. Unmute itself. I don't know. Like he said, he's like, you become 50 years old, you get an ADHD diagnosis. There we go. Interesting. Anyway, I'm going to go solo for a moment. So, again, what he's describing is subconscious programs. That's all it is. And that's what I deal with on my channel and in my business, is that I help you identify these limiting subconscious beliefs. So if you were raised in a particularly stressful environment, well, maybe you don't remember specific things, but you do feel like maybe I have ADHD, maybe I have anxiety. Well, look at how, was the environment you were growing up particularly stressful. It's very possible that you developed subconscious programs, these limiting beliefs, your subconscious programs that are manifesting themselves in anxiety. Because pretty much no child leaves childhood unscathed with some limiting beliefs. It's because the other issue with limiting beliefs is that sometimes these beliefs, two children can experience the same stress or events, and only one of them actually take away this maladaptive subconscious belief that has to be removed through hypnosis later in life. Not all of, they're not all equal. Some people might not even remember that happened, and some people might remember it very vividly. There's things that happen to me in particular that I know that other people in my life can't even remember. So, if you're listening to Gabor Mate and you're like, you know what, this sounds like this could be me, come work with me. We can fix that.
Yeah, and by the way, if a family comes to me with their ADHD child, I'll say to them, what you've got here is a very sensitive child. That sensitive child is picking up on all the vibes, energies, and stresses in your family. You want to help this child? Deal with the whole family. Look at the parental relationship. Look at what stress is there in your life.
And again, he's putting the responsibility on the family to help the child. As opposed to, maybe I'm a little bit older. Maybe instead of an infant, maybe now I'm 12 or 13 years old. And I go to my, childhood doctor and they say, you have ADHD. They say, well, is the household particularly stressful? Before the show, I was thinking about, I'm going to go solo for this. I was thinking about all the kids when I was back in, elementary, middle, and high school that you kind of figured out who was diagnosed with ADHD or not. Maybe they said overtly, maybe we just guessed, but we kind of knew who the kids with ADHD were. Now, I was thinking to myself, all of those kids seemingly unilaterally had some issues at home going on. One of them, I remember, didn't have a father in the home. I think he was dead, being raised by, a single mother. I think maybe there was a stepdad, but there was some stressors in the house. Well, he had ADHD, right? Or did he? Did he really have ADHD, or did he just have a stressful home environment that was causing him to act out? Another kid I can think of off the top of my head, he kind of had he had ADHD, but instead of acting out and being impulsive, he was the more reserved, tuning out type of guy. I remember he was particularly quiet. He didn't fight back a lot. And I remember learning about his parents, thinking, well, the mother was particularly overbearing and overprotective. I think they were extremely religious household. The mother was very overtly controlling. And so his coping, that he had ADHD. Did he have ADHD too? Well, technically they were both diagnosed with them. And, one was impulsive, one wasn't. One was, kind of the opposite of impulsive, tuning out, kind of soft-spoken. Or, so is it ADHD? Is it this disease called ADHD? Or is it just a stressful home life? So what Gabor Mate is arguing here is, instead of very trying to overtly controlling, and so his coping, that he had ADHD. Did he have ADHD too? Well, technically they were both diagnosed with them. And, one was impulsive, one wasn't. One was bizarre. Kind of the opposite of impulsive, tuning out, kind soft-spoken. Close these. Or, so is it ADHD? Is it this called ADHD, or is it just a stressful home? Oh, okay. Bear with me, people. I need to... I was hearing my feedback in the headphones. Oh, I got a couple comments here. Oh. Why am I not seeing those comments pop up? That's weird. I should. ZZ Top, thanks for joining. I can't add your comments. What happened? I thought I had that. We'll have to troubleshoot that. Let's see here. Bear with me, folks. We're still getting the... Oh, is that why? Okay, let's try this. I should be seeing these chats here. No, that's not it. Okay. One sec, folks. If you're watching this on replay, you can skip ahead a couple of seconds. I thought I had this in Chrome. Well, I don't know. That's unfortunate. I'll have to fix that later. Oh, the joys of technical troubleshooting when you're running your own show. That's okay. We'll still keep going. Okay. Let's see. So, and let's keep going.
Look at how you react to the child. Look at, do you understand the child's behavior or the emotions that the child is having, or are you just trying to control the child's behaviors? Look at all that. And very often parents will...
Okay, I'm going to go back up because I think that's... Everything he says is really important here, so...
Look at, do you understand the child's behavior or the emotions that the child is having, or are you just trying to control the child's behaviors? Look at all that. And very often parents will tell me after they've read that book on ADHD is they've totally changed their relationship to their...
And so he's saying... And I really like this. This is really good. So he's basically doing what, like the root cause. So the one approach is that my kid's acting out. I have to address these behaviors somehow, and that's what here's the medication for ADHD. You have to address these behaviors. These you're trying to figure out the symptoms and then deal with the symptoms. Well, the kid's acting out. He's having trouble paying attention. He's zoning out. He's impulsive. We got to address this behaviors. Or you back up and go, wait a minute, why are they like this? So the parents that took responsibility and said, wait a minute, maybe there's nothing wrong with my kid. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm creating a stressful situation somehow in my own life. Those parents that took responsibility for that and then changed the environment that the kid was in, then the kid doesn't need to act out or be impulsive anymore. So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about how instead of treating the symptoms, you actually address the root cause. Sound familiar with what I do? And so, but what if you're 50 years old, like Gabor Mate, and still think you have ADHD? Well, I mean, probably, if you were 6 and had ADHD, that's probably a little, your parents could probably change the environment, and your ADHD can, symptoms can start to go away if they're raised in a less stressful environment. But What if you're 50 and all these subconscious programs have already cemented themselves in your head, and you still have ADHD, and you've made your entire environment as stress-free as possible, but you still have all these ADHD symptoms? Well, what do you do then? Well, you need a tool which can go back and reprogram those subconscious beliefs so that they can be healthy once again. And that's what I do in hypnosis. We go back and reprogram all those subconscious beliefs so that whatever these symptoms are, ADHD symptoms, whether it's impulsivity or if it's tuning out or whatever it is, that you're struggling with as an adult, we can go back to the subconscious programs and clean them out so that we can take out the bad programs and amplify and add good, healthy programs that are desirable programs. So, let's keep going.
The child changes. What a surprise. But you go to most doctors, you got this disease, here's the pill. And by the way, I took those medications and they helped me for a while. So I'm not
When you were in your 50s?
Yeah. I'm not anti-medication.
Which ones did you take?
I took Ritalin, which I can tell you the story.
Sure.
So, one of the hallmarks of ADHD is poor impulse control, right? So I found out about ADHD, and even before I was diagnosed, I took Ritalin. And
why'd you take it before you were diagnosed?
Because I'm a doctor and I could, hey? And
so you diagnosed yourself?
Well, they did, and
so you at least assumed that you had that, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew I had it, but not only that, also because I had poor impulse control. I never practiced medicine that way. I mean, if you came to me for any problem, my first impulse would never be to write you a prescription, unless it was obvious that you needed it for an infection or something. I'd sit down with you and talk to you about what's going on here, but not me. Poor impulse regulation. So I went to a colleague of mine, a medical colleague. I said, "Hey, Bev, I think I got ADHD. Can you give me some Ritalin?" So she writes me a prescription. And then I took it in a higher than recommended initial dose. And because, if a little bit is good, then more must be even better. And again, it's not how I practice medicine.
Right.
But when it came to myself, that's a totally different ballgame. So I felt immediately present and calm and grounded and focused. Yeah.
And
which might have something to do with that impulse control, the impulse control leading to wanting to take more ADHD medication, even though that's not how it normally does things. Kind of a positive feedback loop there.
It's a stimulant.
And I went, well, it calms the ADHD brain. Then I go home, and my wife says, "You look stoned."
Because you're calm.
Yeah. Well, because I got this glassy-eyed expression. And within a couple of days, the Ritalin made me very depressed. That's one of its potential side effects. So I did see a psychiatrist. I was formally diagnosed, and they gave me dexedrine. And I took that for a while.
That's an amphetamine, isn't it?
It's an amphetamine. It's another stimulant. And it did help me. I became a much more efficient workaholic, and I could do even worse.
That's one of its potential side
It didn't change any of my emotional issues, but it made me more focused and so on. It helped me write my first book. But I haven't taken them for decades. But because also I know that the brain can change if you treat it right. So this the reliance on medications that we have is a real poverty of the spirit, a real poverty of imagination, a poverty of medical education. So the average doctor never learns this stuff. The average physician never gets a single lecture on brain development, how the brain develops in interaction with the environment. So when you're seeing, and let alone do they hear about trauma, they don't, hardly at all.
Right.
Brain development and interaction with the environment. Translation, subconscious speak. Not sure if I'm going to use that term yet. For these subconscious programs that are being developed in childhood. Subconscious programs. Subconscious programs. Whenever you hear that. So he's saying that physicians are not even trained on brain development. And I'm going to translate that to physicians are not trained to look for subconscious programs. They say they don't even have to take a lecture on it. So what would that lecture look like? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Stressors in childhood manifest themselves in typically negative symptoms. So what are these negative symptoms? Solo for this. So procrastination, anxiety, or specifically symptoms as an adult. Maybe as a young kid, but as an adult, or a young adolescent adult. Anxiety, procrastination, low self-esteem, feeling low self-worth, feeling like they're not good enough, feeling like they're not good enough for other people, feeling like they can't socialize with other people, feeling like they can't have romantic relationships with other people, feeling like they are not able to get what they want, they're not worthy to get what they want, feeling like money is hard to get, feeling like they can't hang on to what they have, feeling like they aren't worthy to take care of themselves physically. You know, they're not worthy to be fit and healthy. Feeling like other people are out to get them. They can't trust other people. So if you have any of these symptoms that I just mentioned, any of those symptoms and those behaviors that I just mentioned, it's very likely that those are the symptoms of the larger issue, which is a maladaptive subconscious program that was developed in childhood. And Gabor Mate is saying that all of these physicians aren't even required to take a course on development, early childhood development, and stressors. So what do you think is going to happen if you go to your average physician who's not required to learn about this stuff, and you say, well, I'm struggling with any of those 13, however many things I just mentioned? Well, they're not going to know what caused that. They won't even have an idea of what might have caused it. Now, I want to be clear, specifically what caused it is less important. Like, if not everyone has a great memory, not everyone can remember exactly the moment that they developed a subconscious program. That's not really important. I mean, hypnosis allows us to actually go back to the root cause of these things without us really having to think that hard. You use the feelings as a guide, and we can do that. So as long as you can identify what you're feeling, whatever that anxiety is, we can usually trace it all the way back to its roots and pull it out and remove it and replace it. So, but the back half of that stuff is my job. So if you're just listening to this, don't worry too much about, like, well, there was this time that I was bullied, and this time my parents said this, and this time, no, it's not really important. It's not really as relevant. The most important thing is, what are you feeling and where are you feeling in your body? But you go to your average physician and you say you have any of these symptoms, and their reflexive response is to give you a pill. It's like you're treating symptoms, but you're not actually addressing the root causes of these things. And I'm not blaming all of these physicians, but because they don't necessarily know better. They don't have the tools that I have. They don't know about these tools. But if you're listening to this, now you do. So if you know somebody else if you yourself or somebody else in your life is listening to this and thinking, you know what, I would like these root causes to be gone completely, well, come work with me. We can fix that.
So when they see an adult with ADHD or depression or addiction or bipolar conditions or for that matter, autoimmune illness or anything else, they don't think of trauma. They just think of this disease. And they think that the diagnosis explains everything, but the diagnosis don't explain anything. Because think about it. Let's say Gabor or Joe goes to a doctor.
And I think what he means by the diagnosis explains everything, but it really explains nothing, is he's really just, I think what he's meaning is a diagnosis is essentially you see what the symptoms they have, they match X, Y, Z requirements for this, and a label gets put on the summation of the symptoms you have. It's like, okay, but that I already knew I had anxiety and low self-worth and these things. It's like having a label on it is not particularly helpful. You just circled it and wrote underneath depression or ADHD or low self. You didn't do anything with that. And perhaps it's helpful if you're trying to, and really what they're doing is, okay, if I have an official diagnosis, check the box ADHD, check the box depression, now I can prescribe you pills to treat symptoms. Rather than actually asking yourself, well, why do you have these symptoms? Again, it's not always their fault either. They're not trained in this stuff. But that's part of the reason I exist, is so that the point of this channel, the point of this business, if you're watching this, is to spread this awareness so that these people who are just being prescribed pill after pill after pill to treat symptoms can actually go to the root causes of these things, which are the subconscious programs. It all traces back to these subconscious issues.
And they diagnosed with ADHD. Well, what are the hallmarks of ADHD? Well, tuning out, poor impulse regulation, maybe hyperactivity. Why does Gabor have poor impulse control, hyperactivity, and tuning out? Because he's got ADHD. How do we know he's got ADHD? Because he's got poor impulse control and tunes out, and he's hyperactive. Why is he hyperactive, tunes out, have poor impulse control? He's got ADHD. How do we know he's got ADHD? Because, it doesn't. It's circular. It doesn't explain it. It doesn't explain anything. Diagnoses describe things, and that they can be helpful that way, but they don't explain.
Yeah, one of the things that people get, they get treated for and they get diagnosed with is anxiety.
Yeah.
And that one drives me nuts.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts because people pretend that anxiety is a disease.
Yeah, it's not.
And I'm like, my God, the world should make you anxious if you're a sensitive, introspective person. If you're just looking at the world itself and you don't put it in perspective, like it's filled with anxiety. The anxiety it's future problem solving. You're thinking about all the things that can go wrong. You're thinking about your life in a potentially.
I think that this is a little bit of an oversimplification for anxiety. It's like if you're highly sensitive and if you're looking at the world, he's kind of attributing it to environmental reasons, and so it's a little bit of an oversimplification. I think I like the way Gabor Mate is going to describe it here when he describes it as, root causes. Again, everything goes back to subconscious beliefs, subconscious beliefs, subconscious beliefs. Did I say subconscious beliefs? Subconscious beliefs. Or programs.
Devastating way. And that's not a disease. That's just a way you look at the world. And people getting diagnosed with it.
Well,
I don't know about the way you look at the world. Again, I think that's a bit of an oversimplification. It's not just the way you look at the world. It's very likely your subconscious programs are tilting you towards the behavior of being particularly anxious, either all the time or in specific or under specific stimuli or whatever. But again, it's not just. He kind of alludes to it. It's like, well, this is just this thing. It's like, well, it's a little more nuanced than that. But
I won't quite agree with you on that one.
In what way?
I felt anxious at times. The world every day is the same. The
world is the same, but the way you look at it is not the same, right?
That's the whole point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the world is giving you anxiety.
No, the world is not giving me anxiety.
Right. You're giving yourself anxiety by looking at the world, right?
By how I look at the world.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what Joe just said, but he kind of just changed his mind. halfway through. So his whole point is the world doesn't give you anxiety. And so what I would weigh in and say, the world triggers a subconscious program which manifests. So the trigger, there's trigger and response. Let's go solo for this. So there's trigger and response. And so the outside environment are all the triggers, and your response to it is whatever emotion you feel, or whatever you feel as a result of those things. So anxiety, tuning out. Let's stick with the examples we've used today. So you've got and in between those, you've got stimulus, response, is your subconscious programs. And some people would also say there's another layer in there, which is our ability to choose. And we can choose our response. But a lot of these anxiety responses are involuntary. You know, people are yelling at each other at work. That triggers if that triggers that subconscious program from when your parents were yelling at each other as a kid. You instantly get anxiety. That's not a choice. That's your subconscious program kicking into overdrive, kicking in, saying, threat imminent, potential threat. So the world doesn't create anxiety. The world is just stimuli, external stimuli, I guess that's redundant, stimuli into our brains that runs through our subconscious programs and creates some reaction, which is, in this case, he's talking about anxiety. So you create your own anxiety, yes, but I would just go a level higher and say it's your subconscious programs that are actually creating that anxiety. Let's keep going.
I can look at the same world one day and feel grounded and connected, and I may have all kinds of concerns about what's happening in the world, but my nervous system won't be on edge. My adrenaline won't be flowing. I won't be anxious.
That's my point, is that it's not a disease.
It isn't a disease.
Right.
So remember I talked about those brain circuits of lust and care and rage and seeking and so on. One of the brain circuits that we have is described by a very prominent late neuroscientist, Jaak Panksepp, is for panic and grief. Panic and grief are the normal responses of the young human being or the young animal when care isn't available. So when the parents are stressed, distracted, economically or politically, or because of their own unresolved trauma, or whatever's going on in their lives, and they don't respond to the child's distress, they don't pick up the child when they're crying. They make the child be alone when the child is upset.
So what he just described is, again, outside stressors causing the parents to become outside stressors causing the parents to become stressed, causing them to show that stress or display that stress to the child, or just neglecting the child because the outside world, they can't take care of that child, manifests itself in that child having grief or, what was the other one? Grief or anxiety. And it all has to do with care. Because, again, our parents are basically gods, and if our gods can't take care of us, if we might die because a parent is particularly stressed, then we learn that we need to that's a stressful situation. If the people taking care of us can't take care of us, that's something we should be stressed about. And that's not necessarily a bad response to have had. I mean, if we're a kid and we see a lion, keep going back to the lion, let's use like a cougar or something. Or I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger. The saber-toothed tiger looks friendly at first, but You realize as it eats your friend or it eats your parent, you realize that you should probably be stressed about that. So these subconscious programs are not all bad. But if your parent was poor and they were always worried about money, and you constantly had to see them as you were a little kid being stressed about money, saying money is hard to get, I can't ever afford things, bills are always coming due, and your head is being filled with this constant stimulus over and over again that money is stressful. Well, what happens when you're 30 years old, 35 years old, and working for yourself, trying to pay bills? And let's say for this example that you actually have you're a doctor and you have a decent, or a surgeon or something, and you have a decent income coming in. So you've got plenty of money coming in. But your childhood experiences, translation, subconscious programs, are pushing on you constantly when that paycheck comes in that says money is scarce, I can't hold on to money, bills are stressful, that even though you have all the money you need, logically you shouldn't be stressed out about this, but you're still stressed anyway. So maybe you're too conservative maybe you save too much, maybe you're scared to spend any money, maybe you have plenty of money to afford a house and all these things you want, but you're still in a one-bedroom apartment because you're so nervous to expand, because you never want to spend your money. You still buy everything secondhand. Maybe you're maybe you just never go out to eat. Maybe you never treat yourself. Maybe you never go on vacation. Even though you have all this money coming in as a surgeon, but these subconscious programs are still pushing on you that money and paying bills is stressful. This is all stressful. I have to save. I have to figure out ways of survival in this environment. Well, what do you do as that adult? Well, I'll tell you what you do. Come work with me. We remove that subconscious belief around money. And, that's it. One session, you're good to go.
Child's panic circuits get activated, as they should be, because when the child's panic circuits get activated, they cry for help.
Yeah.
It's necessary for survival. A young animal should feel panic when the adult is unavailable. In a rational world, in a sane world, that child would be responded to. But when children, as in our society, are not responded to in their distress, the panic becomes built into their nervous system, and now you have a lot of anxious people.
So what he's saying there is it's natural for a child who needs care to panic. That's not the subconscious program. The subconscious program happens when the child is panicking and it doesn't receive the care it needs. So it's the learned response. It's the subconscious programming in this behavior based on not getting the care it needs. So the flip side, child's panicking because children panic all the time, they cry a lot. But if that child is given care and comfort, the child can calm down. And it can learn to regulate its own emotions. That, okay, not all the time when I'm panicking is the world going to end. And so they can start to learn to regulate their emotions back down. And that's different from discouraging the emotions. That's different. But if you just, provide the care that the child needs, or just the child in general is raised in a peaceful environment, then even when the child is panicking, but everything around is peaceful, it will learn from its outside. It will learn from its parents that it can calm down. There's nothing to be afraid of. They're safe. But it's what happens is the child starts panicking, and the response is, and based on what the response is to the child panicking, is what the brain starts to encode is what the brain starts to encode the subconscious programs as. And that's important because, all babies are the same, all little kids are the same. Sometimes they get emotional, they get upset. But if the parents act as that anchor, act as that rock, the child's is emotionally healthy and stable. But what happens when that's not the case? When the environment is stressful all the time, when the parents don't provide the care that the child needs, well, the child starts to learn that care is not always available when it's time to panic. So it's time to panic more. And that learning that care isn't always available, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, and so on, manifests itself as anxiety. So let's keep going here.
And that's why more and more kids are being diagnosed. You're right. It's not a disease. It's a response to the environment.
And the
response to the environment, translation. It's a subconscious program that was encoded from the response to the environment. That response is that learned behavior in the brain, is that subconscious program.
process of like leaving a child alone when the child's crying, is that to toughen the kid up? Is the thought process that you don't want to encourage this sort of behavior because then they'll do it all the time and then you'll develop an indulgent child? Like, what is the thought process?
The thought process is that the child's behavior is the problem. And so we have to fix the behavior by controlling it. Now, actually, the opposite is true. Because if you pick up the child when a child has distress, physical or emotional distress, you're teaching the child that the world is safe and they don't have to be anxious about it, and they can just ask for help. And it doesn't entrench kind of crying manipulative behavior. How it works, Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's
So, I'm going to go solo for this because that's pretty good. Again, the point is that, so Joe Rogan's point was, well, aren't you teaching the child to just, whenever it wants attention, just cry? And so, you shouldn't reinforce that behavior. If you want to stop crying, you have to stop giving them attention when they cry. And Gabor Mate is explaining that that's backwards. Because you're looking at addressing behavior rather than the causes of behavior. And that extrapolates out all the way back to remember the physician's example? The physician's not being trained on early childhood development. It's the same thing. It's the same line of thinking. You have trouble focusing. You have low impulse control. You have all these things. Here's a pill to treat the symptoms of your behavior. The symptoms are behavior. That's no different than... It's the same exact approach Rogan was talking about for the behavior of a child crying. Again, the important thing is you ask why is the behavior happening, not how do we reduce and the irony is, wouldn't you think that the best way of reducing that behavior is to ask why the behavior is happening? Like, if I've got and we do this intuitively with other things. If I notice there's a pain in my forehead, for example, and I go look in the mirror, and there's a big nail sticking out of my forehead, I'm probably going to assume that the nail has something to do with my symptoms. So if I go into a doctor and they say, well, my forehead hurts, and they give me, I don't know, Tylenol or something to help my forehead. I mean, we'd look at that as like it was crazy. Because we know what the root cause is, because I've got a big nail sticking out of my forehead. Of course my forehead hurts. But I use that example to demonstrate, I mean, that's kind of an extreme example. Because we can say, oh, well, of course, you take the nail out and your forehead will probably feel better. You don't just prescribe Tylenol or let's say a stronger drug, Vicodin or something to help your forehead pain. That sounds ridiculous, right? You go to a doctor because they have a nail in your head and they give you a prescription for Vicodin to take away the pain. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But if that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it also sound ridiculous that I go to the doctor because I have anxiety and trouble focusing and low impulse control, and I get a pill for ADHD? Whereas the root cause is actually just a subconscious issue. So what if you could pull that subconscious program out of your head instead of just treating why don't you take the nail out of your forehead instead of being prescribed Vicodin for, instead of being prescribed Vicodin? And the thing is, you can take the nail out of your forehead. All you have to do is, you come work with me, and I'll pull the nail out of your forehead. I.e., I will help you find and remove these subconscious programs, if there's more than one, to remove this anxiety and these symptoms of low impulse control, anxiety, whatever it is. Let's keep going. This video is almost done.
He's a psychiatrist at UCLA and a very prolific author and mind researcher. He says in his book, The Developing Mind, that the child uses the mature circuits of the adult brain to regulate its own immature, unregulated circuits. So when the adults show up in a calm, loving way, that the child downloads that into his own nervous system, and then he grows up. He's not going to be an infant forever. At some point, he's going to be a mature adult who knows how to take care of themselves. That's a natural process. We don't have to teach kids to be independent. Independent is nature's agenda.
So he downloads, almost like he downloads a program. The word program, he's getting closer to start using some of the language I like to use. And so he says the word download. They learn that behavior. They learn their subconscious mind is programmed that way because they know that the environment the parents in is safe and they don't have to react with panic.
Because the parents are going to die. At some point, the mother bear is going to disappear. That bear cub has to be able to look after themselves in a mature, confident way. That's nature's natural agenda. What the mother bear needs to do is to meet the needs of that infant bear, so the infant bear can mature. So if we meet the child's needs, they're going to mature out of that helpless state with a sense of self-regulation and calm confidence in their own capacity. But when you don't pick kids up, what you teach them is that the world is not available, that they're alone, and that they're helpless. Talk about a formula for anxiety.
Okay. So again, bottom line, if you have a kid, give them the care and attention that they need, and that won't result in these ADHD behaviors and symptoms down the road. And that's what he describes. It's all these subconscious programs are ultimately the root causes of a lot of these issues in adults. So, when clients come to me and they say, well, I'm anxious all the time, or I'm anxious in specific situations, I'm anxious in social situations, or I don't feel comfortable talking to, members of the opposite sex, or I don't feel comfortable getting friends, or I don't feel comfortable talking to my boss, or I don't feel comfortable talking to insert person. I have anxiety around these situations. Well, my first response is always, well, Well, first of all, we kind of narrow it down. So we say, okay, well, do you have anxiety in all these situations or just a few? And where do you feel it in your body? And so if you were to work with me, then what we'd do is I would bring you under trance into hypnosis, and we would identify the root cause of this belief and remove it and replace it with the proper, healthy beliefs. And that's what I've helped all my clients with. So if you're listening to this and you're interested, if anything Gabor Mate says or that I said triggers you or it makes you feel like, that sounds interesting, that sounds like me, well, come work with me. My link is in the description. I'd be happy to work with you. But that's it for the show today. If you like the show, leave a like and comment and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for watching.